Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Kamini, and I'm your host for today. My guest today is Dr. Ravit Dotan, AI ethics advisor, researcher, and speaker. Welcome, Ravit.
Hi, great to be here.
Fantastic. I'm so happy that you're here as well. Ravit, one thing when I've been through reading through your biography and your details, you talking about AI ethics way before it was a cool thing to do. You're having conversations that about responsible AI adoption, AI governance frameworks, and ethics in AI education and training. What were you thinking at that point?
Um, that I want the world to be better. Yeah. Um, yeah. I guess my journey in the space actually started when I was doing my PhD in philosophy.
Yeah.
And I was working on issues of how values interact with science. And I thought, we've been talking about physics and social sciences for a long, long time, but what about this new discipline, machine learning? How do social values interact with this discipline? And so I started by trying to use those lessons that we've learned about other spaces and think about what they mean for AI. And then as it grew, I realized that I want to make an impact on industry. I want to see companies doing things differently. I want to see individuals doing things differently. And so I pivoted into the private sector to do exactly this work.
So you're an optimist then, making the world a better place.
I know that some people are going to hear that and think, wow, she's so naive, maybe, but why don't we try? It's something to be proud of. And I also think that it's not as difficult as some people might think. There are actually a lot of things we can do, even as just consumers of the technology. And I'm finding that there is actually a lot of traction, especially now that people are kind of tired of some of the regular kind of narrative around those tools, and they are starting to think more, but how do I use it well, right? And so there is actually uptake, and a lot of people who are happy, and I mean more than happy, really really want to have those kind of conversations about responsible use. And yeah, we can aim to make the world better.
uh, um, you talk about being an optimist. How is this for being a very naive optimist? I had this thought a couple of months ago. I think I was discussing something with the class about ethics. And then it occurred to me to take two concepts together and I say, why don't we use ethics or why don't we use AI as a hyperscaler to evolve ethically as a species? I mean, imagine the pervasive use of ethics that we've programmed to be at a higher level of ethical behavior than all of us and scaling that worldwide. And then somebody says, but you're so naive, but we'll see.
But there is a realistic version of this, right? All the things that we're sometimes told you're being naive, maybe, but maybe there's a realistic version of it. And I think, the culture that is coming from Silicon Valley and those kind of places is move fast and break things, just do it because it's cool, right? They don't necessarily think in advance. Is the thing that I'm building actually needed? Right? How am I addressing the many, 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 many pressing problems that we're seeing in the world today? They're just are not necessarily thinking of that. And so it can make us think, oh, this is just the way of the world. This is just how things are. But why? um, One thing that I am doing, for example, is teaching people who work in the philanthropy sector and nonprofits how to use AI tools for their advantage, right? So it can start from small things. Why don't we empower those people who are already working on issues that we feel strongly about, you know?
When you talk about things like when you talk about things like that and you phrase it like that, then I see it in I can see it in my mind's eye that everybody from different sectors pulling together, and ultimately the aim is to make the world a better place through enabling ethical AI, making it profitable, making companies realize that it can be financially viable as well as to the bottom line, and different people pulling different strings together, and you're one of those people. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So, Ravit, you position yourself in the space of using AI thoughtfully and ethically to do meaningful work and
Yeah.
rejecting the hype and fear mongering. So, what does this actually look like? You spoke about your work in philanthropy and empowering people to use AI in philanthropy. What other areas are you also involved in?
Right. Yeah. So philanthropy was just an example because it was relevant to what we talked about. But the main thing I'm doing right now is creating a different narrative about AI. That is the key to using it ethically and thoughtfully. And I'm trying to teach as many people as I can that they can think critically about AI, that they can carve their own narrative. And I'm offering my own. But the real point is come up with your own narrative. How, you don't have to take up the narrative that you're hearing from the industry. So for me, the main thing that I'm hearing kind of around me that I disagree with is that we should use AI to create the final product, right? So that would be using chatbots to, for example, say, hey, chatbot, give me, draft this email, give me an outline, brainstorm this, right? Write this document, summarize this, summarize that. That's, I would say, the typical way to use those tools, right? Just kind of send a command, get something back. Maybe you look at it later and revise it very quickly, maybe if you have time. This is the prevalent approach. I'm calling it the takeout approach to AI because it's a bit like takeout, right? You just call, hello, I would like my pad thai, please. And they just give you something. Um, and you might tweak it a little bit. You might add salt or you might move it to a different plate. So, changing the presentation. But basically, you just offloaded the whole task to someone else. That's the most common use, and that's the way that we are encouraged to use those tools. We are encouraged to think of them as, quote unquote agents or assistants, right? Companions, just like an entity that would take on the task and do it instead of us. And we are also kind of sold on the story that they would do it better than us, right? PhD level expertise is kind of the slogan that goes with that. That whole story, no, is what I have to say about it. Um, First of all, we just know from experience that it's just not how it works, right? Like the quality is not PhD level expertise often, especially after you've been using those tools for a while and some of the initial excitement has gone down and you're able to look at what you're getting more critically. But also, we're seeing more and more the problem of cognitive decline that happens when we are using those tools in these ways, right? And that happens always when we offload mental work to technology or to other people, right? It's not new. But the fact that we are encouraged to use those tools in this way is kind of pushing us even more to that direction. Additionally, when we think of job replacement anxiety, right? If what we are intentionally trying to do is to create something that replaces us, right? Then of course we're going to be worried about being replaced. In addition, it doesn't help that companies are firing people using AI as an excuse, and that we hear influential people, right, like Elon Musk or Bill Gates saying, oh, there are not going to be any jobs, right? So this whole thing is what I'm calling the take-out approach to AI. And even just kind of framing it like that is an important step, because I'm saying the way that people talk about AI, we don't have to accept it. We don't have to endorse it. And let's think about this way of speaking, step back and decide whether we actually agree. So that's one step that is absolutely crucial, in my opinion. And then I do have this alternative view that I've developed, but I'm going to pause here and just kind of see because I've been going on this monologue for a while. So I'm going to pause.
Thanks for that, Ravit. One thing that bothers me, and it has been bothering me for a long time, is this cognitive decline issue. So I've written a couple of articles on it on LinkedIn. Obviously, not from an academic perspective, but you know, I'm not an academic, but I'd like to think I've been a lifelong learner, and our ability to fully immerse ourselves in cognitive application, the stretch, the discomfort that comes with cognitive with complex problem solving, and the consumption and digestion of all this irrelevant content, it makes me feel like we're losing something vital. And I think, are we the last generation to intellectually evolve in the way that we are currently do? I'm just thinking. And I've also been a lifelong reader, and before I stood devour novels at a rate, like I could sit with a novel and devour it. But now my ability to digest information is substantially declining after I started using AI. So the question is it a, are we creating cognitive debt uh, from ourselves, taking shortcuts, and it's costing us that thinking capacity for tomorrow? And I wrote this in one of my articles, and I said it's like these days that intellectual stretch, it feels like consuming candy floss. I think it's cotton candy in your world. It's empty calories. I'm not getting that weight, that load, that nutrition from the information that I am consuming. Or I know it's a bit of a diversion from what you're talking about, but what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a diversion. It's exactly on point because we are, I think, at a risk of cognitive decline if we are going to use generative AI in those ways that I've mentioned to offload tasks, to make it do things instead of us. That would be the risk. And one thing that especially concerns me is to see how universities are reacting to the technology, because academia is kind of my professional hometown. I've been there for 10 years. And when I see what professors say about generative AI and what they write about, some choose the approach of banning it entirely, right? And even say, students in my class have to submit assignments only in writing or something like that, right? Some professors will allow generative AI, but they kind of set up traps, right? To dissuade the students from using it. I think that that's the vast majority of professors that I have personally read or talked to, right? What they don't do is teach people, students, how to utilize the technology differently, right? So what is the counter narrative to the narrative that kind of pushes us into the cognitive offloading? If people don't figure out ways to do it, if people don't teach it in, say, universities or on job training or wherever, then we are in that risk.
But you've been working on something new, this shift approach to AI. What problem are we trying to solve that existing approaches we're not addressing? And you are talking about a narrative, a reframing of a narrative about around AI. What reframing do you think we should take, or what approach do you think we should take in reframing our narrative? Because my narrative is, I'm worried about cognitive decline. I'm worried about the level of expertise that somebody with a PhD 10 years from now may have. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm worried about these things precisely. So what I'm calling the chef approach is the alternative to this whole kind of bag of issues that we've described. The point is, can we think of AI differently? Not as means to offload tasks. So I call it takeout because it's like I'm calling someone on the phone. Can you get me the draft of my email, please? um, so contrast this activity with what a chef does. A chef, for example, will create the recipe, will choose the ingredients, will choose the methods, right? They will use tools, they will use the help of people, and also they will be, you know, inexpensible from conducting the whole process, right? They will be cooking, they will be tasting, they will be deciding when the dish is complete. That's the alternative. That's what I want to see with AI use. We should use it like chefs. That's the mindset that I'm developing and working on. What does it mean now outside of this analogy, right? Because this is just a metaphor. Instead of using AI to produce the final output for me and maybe revise it at the end, instead of it, use it to create processes. Use it to create a process that you will go through to do your work better, which may mean faster or not. It may mean deeper. It may mean higher quality, depending on the talk, on the context. You decide what does better mean in your case, right? So first, use it to create a process to go through yourself. You are going through the process. You are using AI to take you through a process that is better than what you had before. Second, think about what you mean by better. Do you actually want it faster? Or do you want it deeper? Or do you want it higher quality? What does that mean to you? What are you actually trying to achieve? So these are the main two components that I'm highlighting right now for people.
Great. So this is what you mean by the takeout trap.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just sketched out what people should do in terms of their own processes or how to approach the thinking of using AI by saying, let's go first and start with what's the processes. What are you trying to speed it up? You're trying to make it better, but create the process that you can implement in your systems. So that's the first thing. It's not a case of cognitive outsourcing, but it's as an aid, a tool that can assist you. So this comes down to what you were saying about AI in humans loop versus human in AI's loop. So what's the practical difference of that?
Right. Um, okay, I want to start maybe with an example, and then I'll answer this question. Okay, so let's compare between doing a task in the takeout approach and in the chef approach. Okay, so I I had a bee problem at my house, and I needed to call someone to remove them. And I'm vegetarian, so those thoughts come about the ethics of bee removal. Some people, something that they might want to do in this kind of situation is go to a chatbot and say something like, "Hey, chatbot, uh, help me think through the ethics of bee removal," or something like that. And if you give a chatbot a prompt like this, I mean, I tried it just to see what happens. It could give you a list. Here's a list of considerations. This is bad. Reasons why it's bad. Reasons why it's good. Right. This is kind of offloading, right? Because I haven't really thought it through myself. I just kind of got this list. Like, okay, I guess these are like the pros and cons, right? So that's the takeout way to do it. The chef way to do it is say, actually, okay, I want to think more deeply about this topic, but it's difficult. Thinking is difficult. I mean, let's put it on the table, right? Thinking is difficult. I'm saying it as someone with a philosophy PhD. Thinking is difficult. Um, what helps me personally is when people ask me questions, right? So another way to use the chatbot is say, chatbot, yeah, I want to be thinking about this topic, whatever that topic might be. I am asking you, chatbot, to ask me 3 follow-up questions, right, about this topic. What happens when I do that is that I get the opportunity to articulate further what I wanted to say. And as I write my responses to those questions, I end up thinking about it more deeply. So what I did was I used the chatbot as a tool to deepen my thinking, not because I used it, right, to give me a list of pros and cons and then look at it later, right, and revise it. It was a part of my process. I was the chef here.
I love
So now
this.
back to
I
yeah.
just love this. You're using a chatbot to help you think better. So you're not
Exactly.
using a
Exactly.
chatbot to think, you're using a chatbot to help you think better.
Exactly. And now I can answer your question from before, right? About humans in the loop. So people, for our listeners who may have not heard this term, when thinking about AI, often people use the term make sure humans are in the loop. And when they say that, they often mean something like you can't let AI systems make decisions automatically. There must be someone, a person, overseeing those decisions. And I agree with that statement. However, when we say something like human must be in the loop, then we are a part of a process that someone else is running. We are a part of what the technology is doing, right? But I want to say, no. I have something that I'm doing. I am trying to think of a topic, maybe ethics of bee removal, whatever your topic may be. Um, AI is part of my loop. I'm trying to think of this topic, and I decided exactly where and how to position the technology in my process. So AI is in my loop, not vice versa.
How is this approach different from just being more thoughtful about prompts? Because the way I look at it, it's you can go and do exactly what you do with your removal of your bees and help me think better by asking me better questions that can prompt my brain to work better in solving this. But from my perspective, that is a prompt methodology. So how is it different from just being more thoughtful about prompts?
I mean, in a way, it is just being more thoughtful about prompts, but it's just a very specific way to be more thoughtful about prompts. Um, because it is potentially writing prompts, but it's just that the prompts are located differently in the scheme of things that I'm doing. I'm not really starting with thinking about the AI. I don't care about the AI. I care about whatever it is that I'm trying to do, right? I care about my work, my side project, my life, whatever that might be. So that comes first. First, try to identify what do you actually want to do with the technology, whether, how, and where it might fit. I'm calling it think first, prompt later. That's a principle that I keep that I'm trying to instill in people. Think first, prompt later. It's not really about the AI or the prompts. It's really about you and your work. That's where it begins. So that comes first. Second, when we say something like just be more thoughtful with your prompts, you see it's not specific enough.
Yeah.
What I want is more than that. I want what is the process? What is the process that it's going to take you through? Right. So it's kind of more specific than that. And also, um, what can you add to your prompt to make your process more responsible, more ethical? It's not going to be perfect, but what can you add to make it better? And I think that that's kind of the key question. So I would say, um, it is kind of a way to be more thoughtful with prompts, but it's a very specific way to be more thoughtful with prompts that makes it more powerful.
And I think some people don't get is that it if you don't know about the process that you are talking about, there's no way that it is going to prompt you to understand a process. If you don't understand, if you don't know anything about making a cup of tea, you're going to ask for the steps, but you will never know that that process isn't correct for making a cup of tea, if I could put it that way. So it, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And you see, when I work with people on this, the most difficult question is to decide what do you want to use AI for? And then often they will start by kind of identifying things that are in the periphery of their work. So if I'm talking to solopreneurs, for example, they'll say, "Oh, I really need something to help me write, my blog posts, or something to identify my SEO terms, or something like that." And then they're going to encounter exactly the problem that you've mentioned. I mean, they sometimes they will want to kind of create that process of writing a blog post or like whatever. But the thing is, It's not their expertise. It's not the main thing that they do, right? They don't have a way of knowing whether it's good. I mean, they have, their own judgment, of course,
Mm.
but you're not going to have the judgment of an expert, which is another really important aspect that I'm thinking differently about. Using AI is not, I think, it's don't think of it as a way to do kind of quote unquote daily tasks faster. No, use it to for your core work where your expertise actually lies and think about how to do it better, right? And then you're going to be able to differentiate, is it a good outcome or is it a bad outcome that I got from the chatbot? And moreover, you are going to be able to make those outcomes better because you're going to be able to tweak it to make it better. I'll give an example. With the bees. Suppose I'm using a chatbot now. Suppose I've created a process to help me think more deeply about whatever topic. If I just say to the chatbot something like, "Hey, chatbot, I'm gonna, tell you a thought, and you're gonna ask me questions about it one by one. Ask me 3 questions one by one." Then I don't know what kind of questions are gonna come up. Not every reflection question is a good question, right? Some are better, some are bad. But what I can do, if I want to reflect on a topic that I'm an expert on, I can say exactly what type of questions it should give me. You see? And that's where the expertise would come in, right? So when I do this with, say, coaches, right? So, for example, I worked on something similar with someone who's a career coach, and she's taking her clients through this process of thinking about their career, right? If she were just to say, "Hey, chatbot, ask them to reflect on their career," it would come up with something really generic, right? But since she's an expert in this, what she can do is say, "Okay, yeah, here's what you're going to do, chatbot." The client, asks this kind of preliminary question, about their work or something, and then you're going to ask follow-up questions. And here's what counts as a good follow-up question, right? And there are guidelines and there are examples of good and bad questions. So now she's shaping the kind of questions that come up, you see? Um, so the questions are going to be better. The reflection process is going to be better, right? Um, and it's not about the cognitive offload, right? It's about digging deeper. But just to clarify that I'm using the dig deeper. It's only one thing you can do with a chatbot that is not, getting the final output. And I think a really important part here is to decide, right? How do you actually want to use the chatbot in a non-takeout way? What is relevant, right, for your work? What process do you want to work on, and what things do you want to do with it? And that's exactly what I'm working with people to identify, right? And by now I have a list of ways, but this list will always grow, hopefully, right, as we find more and more ways to use AI in a thoughtful way, or, as I call it, the chef way.
Thanks for that, Ravit. So, I studied my first degree about 30 years ago. And the way I like to study is I like to get a huge, massive information dump, sift through the information, and then collate what's relevant. That used to take weeks, if not months. But that deep dive and that entire process resulted in an intellectual uh, up and down and sort of engagement with the material that I can say today I'll never do that. And what are we losing from that? Because when you're talking about engaging with your AI or your chatbot in a certain particular manner, if I'm looking for at a philosophy student or I'm looking at a law student and they are telling me they can do the work that you and I did in the space of a week instead of 6 months, what are they losing from that?
You know, it's a great question of whether they could do this work in a week. And I think it goes back to how we are framing those tools. We're framing them, I mean, not we, but it's kind of the framing that comes to us as if the goal is to be faster. But I'm saying the goal is not necessarily to be faster, right? And to students, I would say, use it to learn better. It might not mean faster, because learning happens over time often. You have to reflect, you have to think about the thing, forget about it, come back to it again, right? You have to do this process. You can, if speed is important for whatever context, you can do some parts of the process faster or in a way that's easier. And I'll give an example. For in writing, right? A lot of students or people need to write documents. And as someone who has written a lot, I know that the biggest time sink is when you get stuck. It's not typing the actual words. It's when you get stuck. And for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, I get stuck when I don't know what to write. And I actually need a bit of help. And then I'll rack my brain, like, I don't know. And then I'll get stressed out, right? And then I'll freeze. And I've seen it happen to many students as well. Um, we don't have to introduce AI into writing processes, but if we want to, one way to do it is to help us deal with this blockage, right? For example, it says, I guess it's a running example now, but this with like think deeper kind of process, right? Because sometimes you have an idea in your mind, but it's difficult for you to articulate it. It's difficult for you to get it out. So suppose I needed to write a paper about the ethics of bee removal, just because it's been our example, right? But I'm stuck and I don't know what to say and I feel frozen. I could benefit from talking to someone with it, right? And say, call a friend, like, hey, can you talk to me with about my views on this? But another way to do it would be with a chatbot. And then I would end up with a lot of content that I didn't have before. And I've seen it happen many times. And actually, maybe I'll give a real example here of something similar. An architect that I've worked with. And when you're an architect, you are designing buildings, right? And you want also to visualize. You want a visual image of the building that you're designing, both for your client to be able to see what you are planning for them, but also for you so that you could, have a visual and maybe experiment with some design choices and things like that. But the thing is, it's difficult to articulate exactly how you want it to look like. So it's a process, you see. So we built this process. Yeah, how do you envision this building? So suppose this is something that we did together. Suppose you say, oh yeah, the building is in this like fall setting. But what does that mean? Somewhere it's in your mind, but you may need a bit of help kind of pulling it out. So the chatbot, so you put it in a chatbot process and the chatbot could ask, okay, what do you mean by fall? And then, oh, wait, because I do have something more specific in mind about fall, you see? And then it kind of pulls out the information. So back to your question, if I'm thinking about it, can you do things more, faster but deeper? I think you can if you want to, which you don't necessarily want to do it faster. But I think the trick is, how do you integrate it so that it's the right parts that become faster, and they become faster in the right kind of way, right? So if writing a paper, it takes me forever because actually I'm just staring at a blank page and I'm frozen and it's terrible and it's a terrible experience for me, is there a way to make this part of the process better but still have me be the one who actually thinks and writes the content? And that would be a win-win.
I know what you're talking about, but I have a bit of an opposite problem. When I write, I become so verbose and I've become so full of myself in terms of content. I need somebody to like tighten up the language and the ideas because it becomes overblown. And I can't stop myself. And it's, as you probably know, it's more difficult to write a succinct paragraph than one that is totally overblown. I wanted to speak to you about this. I mean, I was in a bad mood a couple of months ago, so I wrote this article on LinkedIn about uniformity, conformity, a morass of mediocrity. So, and what my point was here is that the risk of everyone using the same AI tools that leads to predictable thinking. And I've been wondering about this. If we are all getting similar outputs from similar prompts and from similar AIs, are we creating a kind of intellectual monoculture? And how does your chief approach address this? You know,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think this would happen if we're using AI in the takeout approach, right? Because then we're not thinking. I'm just telling it, give me my, I want to write an article about the ethics of, bee removal. It will give me something generic, and every person who will write a prompt like this will get a similar article, right? And it will be uniform. And we'll be in this kind of monolithic version, right? But what if we use it differently? So I want to propose a different way, to a person who is encountering your challenge in writing. Um, so suppose you have a very long piece of text, but it's kind of more like a brain dump, right? So it's kind of like a rough sketch. It's not really well organized. That's the way I like to write when I get started. I just do a brain dump. It's like, no, 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 everything on the page doesn't have to be grammatical or even, spelling might not be a thing in that draft, right? And then I need a way to put it in. And often the first step would be putting it into some kind of structure, right? So a way to use it that I think some people might do is say, okay, chatbot, give me an outline. Okay. But the thing is, now this outline is stuck in your mind. It's kind of biasing you. And even if it's not right at the edges, you're going to go for this thing, right? And I think that's cognitive offload. That's the takeout thing. Just give you my outline, right? So here's another way to do it. Chatbot, give me 5 different outlines, right? That's another mode of using it, which I'm calling fail faster. So instead of trying to get your final output, use it for faster iteration. And I know, saying like fail sounds like a negative word, but I really recommend looking up a video called Fail Faster in Video Games. I think that should result in that video. And it explains this methodology of failing faster and how it's actually great. When you design a video game, as they explain, because I've never done it myself, but as they explain in the video, when you design a video game, right, you have to get it in front of people quickly. You have to iterate more and more and more and more versions. Like, don't get attached. Just get your version out. Because, as they say at the end of the video, fail faster, because failing is how we get it right. So I was really inspired by this video. I've seen it years ago, and it's okay. It never left me since then. But you see, what I said with the 5 outlines is failing faster. When you use AI this way, you are putting yourself in a position, you are looking for the problems in the outputs that you're getting. You're not, you see, because you're going to get 5 outlines. You're putting yourself very clearly in a position to evaluate. You're going to look at all of them. You're going to say, this one is half right. This one is maybe better. This one I hate. And then you can do an iterative process. For each of those potential outlines, you're going to say, I like this one because, I don't like this one because, this one gets this right, but that gets that other thing right. And then you're going to ask, give me 3 new outlines with that thing. So you see, you're making that task of structuring your work easier, I think. It takes some of the pressure off, but you haven't gone, full takeout. You haven't gone, chatbot, just do it for me.
Ravit, you know what I like about this? I'm going to steal this from you. I'm going to say my new thing is going to be learn to iterate faster. Because if you iterate faster, I don't want to hear that thing about failing faster. If you iterate faster, you're still going through the same cognitive processes of saying this works or this doesn't work, and this doesn't work for the following reasons. So you don't have a short circuit of the cognitive process in determining what your final outcome is. You're merely saying, I'm doing it faster. Remember, you mentioned the thing about the student being able to short circuit or cut the processes down in terms of the time frames, because learning takes a certain period of time. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn to iterate faster.
Yeah, I totally get it, because failing is a negative word, but here's an advantage to using it. If we call it, it's really important that we position ourselves in an evaluative position, right? If we call it fail faster, I think psychologically it's easier to do it, because we want to position ourselves when we're looking at those outputs from the chatbots as this could be bad, right? we want to kind of counteract the tendency to say about AI outputs, wow, right? And when we're calling it fail faster, we're assuming something here is going to fail. And it's my job to identify those failing points.
Maybe I have some sort of like, uh, attachment to the process, I
Yeah,
don't know. It's maybe call it sentimentality, but the fact that you've been through the process of reaching the other side with this knowledge that you've gained, is it sentimentality? I don't know.
yeah, yeah. And I want to add something because a lot of people a lot of time I talk to people and I encounter this resistance, um, especially in the territory of writing. Um, and I totally get that because of the cognitive offload, because of the ways that people often use those tools. And I even, I gave a talk a couple weeks ago, and someone in the audience said, I don't see why anyone would ever use those tools. Why even use them given the problems? Like, I don't really see what kind of advantage they could possibly have. It did take me by surprise.
Sure.
um, but it also reminded me of something. It reminded me of this. Maybe it's an urban legend of something that Socrates said, because I looked for it and I haven't found a place that he said it, but maybe,
Mm.
I don't know. But anyway, the saying goes that Socrates said um, that writing, like the quote unquote technology of writing, is bad, weakens the mind, because when you write, you don't have to remember as much. So interesting, but also writing is the way that I think. I really needed to think because otherwise I have too many things going on in my mind. And so when we have a new technology on the table, why not think of ways to improve our work? Is it the case that we are a done deal with writing, that there's only one way to write, right? Because I think maybe Socrates, if this quote is even true, made the thought might have been like, I know the best way to think, and it's only within my mind, not with writing on a paper. Maybe because it's what he was used to, like, I don't know. But it's kind of missing out on exploring a different way to do it that might come with a different set of benefits. And that's what I think of AI as well. Maybe using it in some ways is unhelpful. I mean, definitely using it in some ways is unhelpful, but why miss out on learning a new way to do it that might be super great in its own way?
I felt, I mean, 2 years ago, I started writing short stories, and, for the first time in my life, I was writing fiction. And I actually found AI to be extremely helpful, although there is amongst writers this sort of stigma attached to using AI. And I was using it things for like character profiles and um, things like, in fact, one of my stories I was writing about the psychology of a kidnapper, and I wouldn't in a million years know about this. So when I found out about that, that was very helpful to help me with my writing. So using AI as a tool for that, not for my writing, or not for writing my book, but actually for the knowledge that also came from it. So that was very helpful. But another thing, you were talking about the pushback you got, and I think sometimes, I don't know how true this is, but my opinion is it depends if you're a digital native or not as well.
Mm.
And I am clearly not, but it may be that.
But I think there's an advantage to those people who are not digital natives, because they are able, it might be easier for them to think of this critically and be very intentional with how, when, and why can this technology be helpful, rather than kind of running into it, and not really being reflective. Because I think that that's what we need. It's not about AI, it is about you. what do you need, and then feed it in. And if you're not digitally native, perhaps you're not used to just kind of going at it with technology, which means maybe that you're going to stop and reflect more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very nuanced topic as well because, you know, going back to the question of we don't know what we don't know, so we don't
Mhm.
know how to approach this particular topic if we don't have the right questions. But this approach of yours, the chef approach, and it requires people to think differently about AI entirely. And you've worked with governments, industry, academia, and AI governance. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how we approach AI regulation or policy, what would it be?
Wow, what a great question. I want to start with talking about the impact of the EUAI Act, which is the leading regulation about AI. There has been a shift in the AI ecosystem in the last year or two. And I think that the passing of this regulation had a bit of a, boomerang effect. Because what happened once the law came into effect, I mean, not once, gradually, it's way more difficult now to talk with people about AI ethics because a lot of people have gone into compliance mode. And so how do we they're focusing on the mindset that comes specifically with the EUAI Act, which is kind of this risk-based approach. And then how do we make sure that we're not in the high risk category and all of that. It is way more difficult for me now than it used to be to talk with people about, say, fairness, right? Or, those other explainability, those other topics that are not highlighted in this very influential regulation. So there's a bit of this unfortunate effect. I mean, we've seen it before with other things. I think GDPR had a similar effect. When it comes to regulation, what I would want to see way more of is actually not necessarily new laws, but they are useful sometimes. I'm not saying that they're not, but we have this entire legal system already with laws that are already in place. I would like to see AI companies being subject to those laws that already exist more, right? So, I mean, there are sometimes there are laws that try to prevent AI discrimination, which I totally get. It's important, but also we already have laws against discrimination. Why does it matter if a company discriminates because of its use of AI? They should be penalized just by the regular laws. I think if we go this way, we might get not as much backlash as we're seeing right now, and maybe not as much kind of going into this compliance mindset. And most importantly, I don't like that AI ethics becomes this additional topic, additional barrier, one more thing I have to think about, right? Um, No, it should be a part of how you think of your business generally, how you think of compliance generally, how you think of your AI, company values differently. And so I think that's what I would do with my magic wand: integrate AI responsibility topics with all other topics, so that it doesn't become this separate issue that honestly people often kind of push to the wayside.
I hear you, Ravit, because the way I see it is, um, I started off my career as a lawyer, and when people start talking about trustworthy, responsible, and all of those words, because words are important, it implies a compliance slant. When you talk about ethics, in my opinion, you're talking about aspirational behaviors, going beyond that compliance requirement. And now we can't even decide in terms of our lexicon what we agree with in terms of the language, and as you said, we are talking about the legislation, and people go into compliance mode, and we forget that we can actually leverage ethical AI in terms of not only the company's competitive advantage, but change the whole ecosystem in terms of how we view ethical AI. It is a competitive advantage. It doesn't stifle innovation. And from a perspective of what it is in terms of sustainable innovation, if we can talk about it that way, it's an absolute plus. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I wanna add to this. You see, what I'm trying to do now is even go one step further. I don't want to just say, listen, it's a competitive advantage. I have stopped separating the topic of AI ethics from the topic of AI adoption. And that is a part of what I'm doing with the chef approach. What I've realized is that if I position myself, right, as a person who's saying to people, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, it's just like it's not going to be effective. Instead, I'm saying, okay, I'm going to teach you how to use AI. I'm going to teach you how to use it in a great way. It's actually going to be better. It's just that also, by the way, a crucial part of it is the ethical lens, and that's what I'm doing with people, right? So as you write it's called a system prompt. Are you familiar with this term? So, okay, a regular prompt is something like chatbot tell me like things about the ethics of bee removal. It's just kind of one thing in, one thing out. It's just kind of one thing. Give me my pad thai. um, in the takeout analogy. But you can also design the entire interaction with a chatbot. And that's kind of what you do when you tell it to take you through a process. You're saying, chatbot, you're going to take me through this process. Whatever thought I give you, you're going to ask me 3 questions. Okay. So, yeah, I was talking about a system prompt. Okay, so a system prompt is a type of prompt that allows you to define processes that the chatbot will take you through. If you look under the hood of custom chatbots or AI agents, that's what makes them work. But it's just a prompt in the sense that it's just a bunch of words. But those words are instructions for what you want the chatbot to do, what you want the process to be like. So a very simple way to define a system prompt is to say something like, chatbot, take me through this process. Every time I ask you to help me think through a topic, you're going to ask me 3 questions, one by one, building on each other, and then you're going to give me a summary at the end. That's a very simple system prompt, right? And you can just paste it into your chat window and make it go. You can put it in a Word document, put it in your knowledge base, and now all the chats in the projects are going to behave in this way. If you haven't tried it before, I really recommend trying it out. When you have a system prompt, you can and should add behavior guidelines. These could be things like, don't be biased. Don't make assumptions based on demographic characteristics such as gender or race or location or things like that. You can say things like, make sure it's an authentic inquiry. So don't nudge the user. Don't push your own opinion. And try it out and see how it changes the interaction. I will say the different chatbots respond differently to this. And in my experience, Claude is the most malleable, but you will see the difference regardless, right? And so when the point of the chef approach, build your process. And as you build your process, you are also thinking about how you want it to quote unquote behave. You can take bias out. I mean, not completely out, but reduce it. Or if you're doing images, I have a process that I'm doing to produce images for my newsletter, cover images for my newsletter. And so I have one of my guidelines there is to protect copyright. And I'm just saying, never give me styles that includes people's names. I don't want to do that. And so you are just incorporating your values in there, and it's not a separate topic from building your chatbot. You are building your chatbot. It's just that a part of building your chatbot is making sure that it is value aligned. You see? And so that's the approach that I think is most productive. I don't even need to justify it as a separate topic. It's just, it comes together. It's one topic. I'm going to teach you how to build your custom chatbot. And also this custom chatbot is going to be value aligned. That approach is way more effective. You don't get resistance because people want to do the right thing. People want to create chatbots that are value aligned, and they will do it much more easily when you present it as an, in an organic way rather than kind of a unit you put at the end, and then you need to justify it either by, the stick of regulation or the carrot of business success.
I like this a lot. Value aligned system prompts. Uh, for my part, I always tell Claude, because Claude is so malleable, I say, Claude, be brutally honest with me, Claude. So,
Exactly. You see,
yeah.
so that's the beginning of it. That is exactly the beginning of it. And I've heard people say that I mean, this exact issue with this, like, oh, it's everything I say, it says you're amazing. And you wanted to stop it because it also has this kind of psychological effect. You can also do that. In fact, you can create just a list of instructions of how you want it to interact with you. You know, don't don't overpraise me, right? All those kind of things, and just have that working in the background of your chatbot, and already you did something.
And it also leads me to think that companies can actually, because I mean everyone's using AI these days to make their jobs faster, whether it's endorsed by their company or not. What do they call it? Shadow AI. They use it in the background. And I mean, when we get to the point eventually where we can, companies will say, yes, you can use chatbots, and here's the guidelines for using them, because at the moment it's a free for all out there. You want a sales report, you upload all your sales data with your names of your customers and everything, and and you don't know anything about how not for it to track the data or to delete it, and you use it, and nobody's having those conversations. But that's beside the point. What I was talking about is, if we have these system prompts and they can be designed by companies to align with their mission, vision, values, and all of that, so all the employees can use a values based, a corporate values based way of using that chatbot or that AI. So, for example,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, definitely. That's something that I would really like to see. So instead of a policy that sits on a website and no one is looking at, right? They say you you should all be creating these processes. And when you create these processes, we require that you add this specific list of things to all of your, custom chatbots. That would be fantastic.
And for example, and one of your values is agility, or one of it is teamwork. Yes, in terms of the values of your company, this is how we incorporate agility into your process, or this is how we incorporate teamwork into that process that you wanted. And then it's
Hmm.
automatically all there.
Right. And there's a saying that people are always saying, move from theory to action, things like that. But even when they say it's a bit of a hollow saying often. This is what we're talking about right now is a way to make it concrete. You have your theoretical values. What does it mean in terms of guidelines for your custom chatbots? Specifically, what does it mean?
Or going further than that, you're a supplier of certain types of products, and one of your things is not to use child labor or slavery, and you have very, very strict rules about all of that, and your supply chain and all of that. And you say, well, we want a process to do X, Y, and Z. Same thing. I cannot recommend X country because in terms of the laws and the regulations, it does not meet up to the standards of your whatever document you have on that. So yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
exciting stuff. I get it. I get it. It's exciting. Yeah. Um, being a risk manager for most of my career, the question I'd like to ask is, what keeps you up at night in terms of how people and organizations are currently adopting AI?
I mean, let's put it on the table. It's actually a question of whether organizations are adopting AI. We're seeing contradictory statistics every day. We just had this recent MIT study. What did they say, that in 95% are not really adopting
95%.
it?
Yeah.
It's never passing the pilot phase. Are they adopting it? Yeah, it's a question on its own. I do think that it's the cognitive dependency that really, really concerns me.
just going back to that MIT study, I think that everybody is so anxious to get onto the bandwagon. They're not asking the questions first. If we have the board comes up and say, "Oh, we need to get AI into all of our process," the people on the ground are say, you know what? We've in terms of our KPIs, in terms of our budget, we're 95% there. Why must we add more complexity into a process that is almost 100% working? You want to add complexity into something that is 95% there, and there's no substantiation for why it's not, that added complexity is not going to break a system that's mostly working. So, it's sometimes people just need to take a step back and say, do we need it to start off with? It doesn't necessarily mean if we add AI to a process, it's going to automatically make it 100 times better or not. It depends on
That's
your
right.
circumstances. But it sounds good at the bottom. We need AI, we're going to implement this, and we are going to get with the revolution. And I'm like, okay, fine. But
Right.
when the MIT report comes out and it's 95% are stuck in the first phase, then you will understand why it's important to take a step back and question the whole process first.
That's right. Yeah, it can't be you want to adopt AI for the sake of it, right? If you're not going to have a strategy and think about it just like anything else, it is probably going to fail.
So, Ravit, on the flip side, what gives you the most hope about the future of human AI collaboration when it is done thoughtfully?
Yeah, I don't like this term human AI collaboration because it's personifying, right? It's not only is it personifying, it kind of implicitly puts us in opposition with technology. But when we kind of compare it to other expressions, we won't do that. Like we won't do human internet collaboration. Like that sounds weird. We won't do like human computer collaboration. That sounds weird. um, but I will say for the use of AI, what makes me hopeful is that I feel that the hype is starting to go down. That makes me really happy. There was a recent report just a few days ago, came out a report from McKinsey. They surveyed, I forget how many companies who were trying to adopt AI, or agents, sorry, more specifically agents. And the number one mistake that they highlighted is that they don't think of processes, that people go head first into agents. They don't really think about it. So the fact that it's coming from McKinsey even, right, tells me that the tide is changing and that hype is going down and, you know, being more thoughtful is starting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and exchanging ideas and hearing about your chef and takeout methods and finding out how we can use AI and not necessarily embark on a journey of cognitive decline. So,
That's right. That's
thank,
right.
thank you very much, Robert. I really appreciate your time and take care.
Yeah, thank you for your questions and thank you for having me. This was really, really fun.
Take care. Bye bye.